Hi there, my name is Jenny Grove and I am a certified peer specialist with PeerStar, and welcome to the Social Determinants of Health introductory training. It's good to have you here. Just a little bit of background on me. I am a CPS, like I said, and I also have my Bachelor of Social Work from Bloomsburg University. I work in Region C, which is Mifflin, Center, Huntingdon, and Juniata County. And I've been with PeerStar for roughly a year. And I also did an internship, which is my field work for my bachelor's degree in social work with PeerStar. And one of my main projects was working on this social determinants of health training. So, believe it or not, 6 months ago, if you would have asked me, hey Jenny, what is social determinants of health? I would have been like, I really couldn't tell you. So, don't be scared. I can understand how social determinants of health, that terminology can sound kind of big and looming and scary, but just 6 months ago, I was in the same place as you, kind of getting an introduction, getting my feel for what this is. But the reality of what social determinants of health is it's something that you as a peer support worker have been coming face to face with in your work since day one. And the goal of this training is to just give you some more information and tools to support you in your work that's addressing that. And also, maybe open your eyes to some new perspectives and some new ideas about how to address social determinants of health. So, by the end of this module, I feel confident that you'll be able to have a basic understanding of what social determinants of health are, begin to understand how they affect health and wellness on both an individual and a community level, and explain what role peer support has in addressing social determinants of health. So before we start, I just wanted to give a little bit of context as to what to expect throughout this training. We will be covering 4 main topic areas. So the first area is going to be defining what exactly social determinants of health are. And after we define it, we're going to discuss what some of the factors that are associated with negative health outcomes are. And also, I've thrown in a fun little video for you, so hopefully it won't be too dull, but it'll help to broaden your understanding of not only what's the textbook definition, but how does this apply to what I'm doing and help to connect to real world examples so you can apply them. And I encourage you throughout this training to think of real life examples of your peers or situations within your job where, okay, well, I can see how this has affected my peer and has been a social determinant of health that has led to this outcome. Because whenever you're able to apply things like that, it can really help to make this training meaningful for you. Next, we're going to talk about the 9 domains, so the 9 specific social determinants of health that PeerStar identified that are going to be included in the ANSA process. So those are going to be specific social determinants of health that we're going to screen for. So I want to introduce them to you. We're not going to go real in depth, but just to give you an idea of what specifically we're going to be looking for as kind of, okay, does the peer have this? Do they have access to this? And what maybe is the lack of having access to this or struggling with this? What could that be affecting? What barriers could that be producing to accessing goals? After that, we're going to discuss the impact of social determinants of health on health and wellness, and of course that should be a no-brainer. But we're also going to talk about how that's not just an individual type issue, but also that it moves into our communities as well and our agencies. And then lastly, we're going to talk about why the heck this matters. That's a question that you always should be asking when you're sitting in these trainings, so we're going to talk about it. Why should this matter within peer support? Why is it important? And how does this apply to my job? So we're going to go over all of that. Before we get too deep into this training, let's give social determinants of health a solid definition. So the definition that I got for this training is from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, but it's the same definition from the World Health Organization as well as the CDC. They're all working on initiatives towards addressing social determinants of health. For all of these, it's, like I said, the same definition. And I'm going to read it word for word because I think that it's really important to have the exact definition. So it's defined as the conditions in the environment where people are born, live, learn, work, play, worship, and age that affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes and risks. So that's a pretty wordy definition, and it also seems kind of vague, but I wanted to leave it vague for a little bit to keep your imagination open and to get you thinking. And I also tied on this statistic to go along with it from the PA Department of Human Services that says that doctors' visits only account for about 20% of a person's health. 20%. When I first read that, I was like, whoa. Because as people working in a recovery-oriented field, we believe that recovery is holistic, right? That health and recovery is defined in multiple different areas of life, and we believe that mental health is a piece of health, and as well as physical health and medical treatment. But to actually hear the Pennsylvania Department of Human Services define that doctors' visits only account for about 20% of a person's health, I think is kind of huge. So to kind of, go back, tie this all together, what does all this mean, right? To start, genetics isn't the only thing that determines our health, and also individual factors aren't the only things that determine our health. And I think that genetic factors being the only thing that determine our health, we've kind of moved past that. Like, we say, okay, I'm responsible for my choices. I get to pick kind of the foods that I eat, and I get to pick whether I'm healthy and I exercise and that kind of thing. But sometimes we have barriers towards making those healthier personal choices. So it's not always easy to make what it can seem to be a good personal choice towards health. And that's kind of where social determinants of health theory says, hey there, some of these barriers towards health are at a greater level than individual, meaning that it's not just based on one person's choice. While that is a factor, it's not the only factor. And while it does occur at an individual level, there are bigger things going on that can kind of contribute to a greater problem. And, looking at the definition specifically, health is more than just physical and medical. In that definition, where people are born, live, and then I think it's really cool, where we learn. So education is a piece of health. That's kind of a new concept. Where we work, where we play, where we worship. All of those things are now being considered a value to our health, where before, health is kind of like medical. And now we're seeing this shift towards a more holistic view, a more open view towards what health is. And we're all in peer support and we're all recovery oriented, so I wouldn't be surprised if many of you already thought that way. But it's really cool to see these movements and our state and our national government taking initiatives towards these types of things. And we have to remember too that our environment and the conditions in our environment are not always directly in our control, which is where we come in, right? And we're going to talk a lot more about that later and even in the next slide. So I've got a lot more for you on that, but hopefully that helps to kind of build structurally for you what the basics of social determinants of health are. So now, to get more specific about social determinants of health, you might be thinking, okay, what are some examples of social determinants of health factors? So I've listed some here for you. Some of the factors of social determinants of health can include things like being under financial strain, so being unable to pay your bills, or being on unemployment, or being in debt. These can be associated, and they can be related to each other too. These factors, it's not always going to be cut and dry. You can have more than one of these factors, and oftentimes you will have more than one of these factors going at one time. Food insecurity, not having access to food or healthy food, or not having the money to buy food. Availability of transportation. This is probably the biggest one that I see working in my rural community. When I first started in peer support, I was only in Mifflin County, and access to transportation was usually my biggest issue. And one of my biggest frustrations were peers that wanted to use the peer support service as transportation. And it was frustrating to me as a new CPS, because I was like, man, I really hate being taken advantage of and used as a taxi. But whenever I really started thinking about it, I wasn't going to let myself be taken advantage of and used as a taxi. I had to learn how to set those boundaries and things. But when I started really thinking about, the why behind it, why are people feeling the need to take this time when we could really be working on some good goals that they have and taking the time to use effectively, because I knew that they had stuff that they wanted to work on. It leads back to the fact that transportation in Mifflin County and in many rural parts of Pennsylvania just aren't available. So whenever that my peers would see an opportunity, it was out of necessity, and it was support seeking. It was out of necessity. It was out of needing to fill that need that they had. And so then I was able to recognize it as a goal and address that goal within the peer support process, and things got easier. And so I think whenever we can recognize, and we'll talk more about this later too, whenever we're talking about why the heck this matters, but whenever we're able to identify, why some of these factors and how exactly they're barriers, we can also identify ways that maybe we can help fix them. The next one that I have listed is access to quality education. And that one is interesting to me because it's not one that I would initially think about it, but education and having access to quality education can really control your skill set and the access to opportunities that you have in the future, which can then affect your quality of life. And then also affordable childcare. So there's just a few examples. When we talk about the ones that we're going to be screening for in the ANSA, we'll definitely be going more in depth. But again, just introductory, these are some of the different factors. Outcomes that can occur as a result of these factors include things like obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. Now, these are more medical and physical health kind of outcomes, but they're still outcomes nonetheless. And we're seeing these directly correlating from those things such as not having access to healthy foods or not having availability of transportation to get to those healthy foods or being under financial strain. We're also seeing depression and anxiety, and we're seeing that correlated like I'm sure that you see in peer support with many of these barriers as well as rates of child abuse and neglect, violence, and trauma. And again, all of these are contextual, so it's not going to be cut and dry, and each of these things can exist independently, but just kind of an introduction as to how having some of these factors can then down the road lead to these outcomes.